Hey guys, Deathy here. Today, I wanted to talk about every single hero and offer a little bit of insight about how to better lane against them. This video is not meant to be an exhaustive tips and tricks video, just more so my thoughts about what I think about when I'm laning against specific heroes. If you guys enjoy this type of content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Without further ado, let's get started. Starting off with Abrams. With Abrams, the main things you want to be aware of is that he has a ton of regen, especially if you fight him in his Siphon Life. When he uses Siphon Life, make sure you do not try to trade with him while inside it. The other thing you want to be aware of is Shoulder Charge will kill you if he hits you with it. Well, it's not necessarily going to kill you, but it's going to make you a lot easier to kill. His passive gives him a ton of health regen by default, as well as damage regenerated, which makes him very tanky in lane. Against Abrams, the playstyle you should be having is trying to focus on last hit. Right now, Abrams is an extremely strong hero, and he's hard to beat in lane. If you want to beat him in lane, I would recommend getting Decay very early, as Decay counters him pretty hard. The other item that you can buy against Abrams that is very good is Reactive Barrier. That way, if he charges you, you get 600 health worth of shields, and you're very hard to kill. Bebop is a very specific matchup. Bebop has two main ideas in lane. Idea number one is to hook you with his hook ability. The main thing you can do against this is try to position in a way that makes it hard for you to be hooked. Don't show yourself easily. Do not make your movement predictable. The hook is not that easy to hit. The other thing is his bomb. He's going to want to try to apply it to you as often as possible. I've seen many Bebops will just roll into their enemies, apply bomb, and roll away. So you want to be aware that Bebop wants to roll into you and apply the bomb. Try to position yourself in a way that makes this harder. Against hook and against uppercut, Reactive Barrier works. So if you're struggling against being hooked and dying, you can always buy that item. Against Dynamo, the main thing you want to be careful of in lane is his first ability, Kinetic Pulse. A lot of Dynamo players right now will put 2 points into their Kinetic Pulse right away, and it does a surprising amount of damage. If he hits you with Kinetic Pulse, you will die. His gun does a ton of damage. So the main thing that you want to make sure you don't do against Dynamo is getting hit by this ability. If you see him rolling towards you aggressively trying to use it, make sure that you back up in order to dodge it. Other than that, the lane against Dynamo should in general be fairly easy, as he has a giant hitbox and you can harass him a ton. His other abilities are not very threatening in lane. You do have to watch out for Quantum Entanglement if you have some abilities that he can dodge, for example, 7 stun. And obviously his healing makes him a little bit harder to bully out of lane, but he definitely needs it because his hitbox is so big. Always shoot Dynamo as much as possible, and you should be fine. Great Talon has a few tools in lane that are scary. His charge shot has a ton of burst damage, and he can use it very often. His rain of arrows gives him a lot of damage while in the air, and it's extremely scary. In general, Great Talon's entire game plan is to try to kill you. You do have to watch out for his immobilizing trap. I would say that against Great Talon, the best thing you can do is buy some health items early on, such as Healing Right, Extra Health, Enduring Spirit, etc., in order to survive the burst damage from him. If he can't kill you in lane, you'll usually be able to buy items to deal with him later on. So I would focus mostly on last hits against him and realizing that he's the type of hero that wants to try to kill you in lane. Haze, on the other hand, is a very weak laning hero. Against Haze, you want to be pushing in the wave as much as possible. She has no tools to deal with the wave at all, and she has very little harass early on. Her passive is not very good early. Her Sleep Dagger is a decent tool, but it's not that scary, and her other ability doesn't offer her anything in lane at all. I would say against Haze, there's no specific item that you need to buy, but I would just make sure that you're pushing the wave and being aggressive, because there's not a lot she can do if you're doing that. Infernus is a very strong laner, as he gets a lot of lifesteal really early on. The one thing you want to be aware of with Infernus is that his Catalyst gives him damage amp, 25%. If you get hit by his Catalyst, you want to make sure to run away. Also, his Afterburn builds up. What this means is that if he gets the burn on you, if he hits you just once again, it'll refresh the duration. If you are burning, you want to make sure not to peek him at all so he can't refresh the duration. If he goes in with Flame Dash, make sure to run away as well. Basically, if Infernus is using an ability, chances are you most likely cannot trade into him. A good item to buy against him can be Decay, because he's very reliant on lifesteal, but other than that, Infernus is just one of the strongest laners in the game right now, and you just have to be very careful of when they're using their abilities. If Infernus doesn't have Catalyst and doesn't have Flame Dash, he can be pretty weak to getting gone on and committed by certain heroes. Ivy is not an overall very strong laner, so there's not a lot of things you have to be aware of when laning against Ivy. However, just know that Kutsu Bomb does movement slow, so you definitely don't want to be standing in it. Watcher's Covenant just gives bonuses to Ivy and Ivy's ally, so generally speaking, when you see the Watcher's Covenant effect active, you probably want to be a little bit more passive because they're a little bit stronger. Stoneform is the one ability that I'd say you have to watch out for, and it's usually the abilities that Ivy skills first. Against Stoneform, make sure that whenever Ivy uses it, that you use a stamina to roll back. This should keep you very safe. Kelvin's also an extremely oppressive laner. He's got his beam, which slows you, your movement speed, and your attack speed. He's got his grenade, which allows him to nuke you as well as push the wave, and his ice path allows him to gank other lanes very easily. I would say against Kelvin, there's not a ton of items that you can buy specifically for him. The one thing is, once again, if he uses his ice beam, make sure that you use your stamina to get as far away as possible, and try not to stand on top of creeps too much so that he can use Frost Grenade on you and push the wave at the same time. You want him to make a choice about this. When Kelvin doesn't have his Arctic Beam, he can be pretty vulnerable to getting gone on, so keep that in mind. Lady Geist's 3 abilities can all be pretty scary in lane. Her Essence Bomb does a lot of damage, but is fairly easy to dodge if you're paying attention to it. What I would say about Essence Bomb is always be looking at the Lady Geist and be ready for the bomb to be thrown. Life Drain is only scary if you're trading with her. If you go on her and she uses Life Drain, most of the time you're better off hiding around a corner. She needs line of sight to perform this ability. Malice actually does damage amp by stack. If you're getting hit by a lot of stacks of this, you absolutely cannot trade with Lady Geist. So keep in mind, if you have stacks of Malice on you, play a little bit more passive. If you don't have any stacks of Malice on you, you can usually be a bit more aggressive. Lady Geist's main threat is nuking you down with Essence Bomb during the lane. So dodging her bomb is really the key to winning lane against her. Lash can be a pretty scary hero to lane against. He's got 2 main tools to deal damage: Ground Strike and Flog. These 2 tools are very different in their use. Lash will usually use Flog to trade with you and heal, and Lash will usually use Ground Strike to try to kill you. The one thing I do have to say is try to position yourself in a way that makes Lash's Ground Strike hard to hit. For example, in the lane, if you're standing on top of the bridge and Lash uses Grapple to get on you, if you double jump, it'll usually make it very hard to hit the Ground Strike. Another thing I would say is if you're in a duo lane, try not to stack on top of each other so Lash can't hit the Flog on both of you at the same time. McGinnis is a decent laner. However, if you focus her turrets, she is not that scary in lane. If she puts up a turret, make it your priority to shoot it. Of course, don't miss creeps for it. Don't take a ton of damage just to kill the turret, but try to just take it down and not let the turret sit there forever. Her wall is actually her main threat during the laning stage. If she catches you out of position with a wall, you might as well be dead. What I would recommend against this is to always keep in mind that McGinnis has wall, and she does a little sound cue when she's deploying her wall. So when she does that, make sure that you try to run away as fast as possible so you don't get caught in a bad situation. Her wall is a very long cooldown, so while her wall's on cooldown, you should be aggressive on her and try to get benefit from that. Mo and Krill can sometimes feel unbeatable in lane. I would say that the 2 main counters against Mo and Krill are going to be dodging his Scorn and buying an item like Decay. Sandblast makes it so that if you go on him, he can disarm you, making it very hard to kill him, and Scorn gives him a ton of healing if he hits it on heroes, especially if he's in a dual lane. If he hits 2 heroes with it, without any upgrades and any items, he'll heal for 240 health. What this means is a lot of Mo and Krill players are going to dash into you and use Scorn. Another thing about Scorn is that it has a vertical hitbox, so even if you're on top of the bridge, if he uses Scorn, he'll still hit you. I would recommend just being aware that Mo and Krill wants to go on top of you and use Scorn, and if you see him dashing forward, always dash backwards. The other thing is, if you can rush Decay very early against this hero, like buying it sometimes first item, you can bully him out of lane fairly easily, as it'll do a lot of damage to him and reduce his healing significantly. Paradox is a very oppressive laner. Her Kinetic Carbine has an audio cue that lets you know when it's charging. Generally speaking, while she has Kinetic Carbine up, you don't want to peek her at all, and you want to wait it out. If she can consistently hit Kinetic Carbines on you, you are almost guaranteed to lose the lane. That is the main thing I would worry about. Her other ability, Pulse Pulse Grenade is just helpful for her to do some damage and gives her damage amp stack as well. So you definitely don't want to be standing in it for too long. If you get hit by this ability multiple times, you're going to be taking 20% extra damage from Paradox, and that's especially scary with the Kinetic Carbine. In terms of items you can buy against Paradox, there's not a lot of items, but Reactive Barrier does work against her swap, which means if you think she's going to try to go for an all-in play on you as soon as she gets her ultimate, buying Reactive Barrier can sometimes be a very good play, because it'll give you 600 effective health as soon as she swaps you, which oftentimes gives you more health than before she swapped you. I'd say against Paradox, your overall game plan should be to not get hit by Kinetic Carbine, try to push the wave and harass her whenever you can, but overall recognize that she's a very strong laner and that it's going to be tough. Pocket is an interesting laner because on one hand, he has minus 15% base spirit resist, making him very weak to spirit poke, but on the other hand, he has the ability Barrage, which gives him 7% amp per stack up to a maximum of 4 stacks, and this is all damage amp. This means if he hits 4 barrages, then he'll get 28% damage amp, and this applies to all his abilities as well as his gun and his items. The main thing against Pocket is you really want to make sure you don't get hit by Barrage. It's very hard to dodge all the projectiles, so most of the time you'll get hit by at least one, but make sure to try to dash in unpredictable patterns. It's a fairly slow traveling projectile, which means he has to try to predict your movement. So try to move erratically in order to only get hit by 1 barrage. If you do get hit by 2, 3, or 4 barrages, make sure that you don't fight him for a certain period of time. The amp duration lasts 15 seconds, so it's a very long time. So the best tool is really to dodge it in the first place. If he has 2 barrage stacks, you don't need to be that scared, but if he has 4, then you definitely should not fight him under any condition. Other than that, his flying cloak and suitcase make him fairly hard to kill. One answer to that is buying something like Slowing Hex, which doesn't allow him to go to his cloak. He can still cast it, however, and so good Pocket players will cast their cloak, go into their suitcase, and then teleport to it once Slowing Hex is down. Considering the fact that he has minus 15% spirit resist, if you're a hero with spirit nukes, you should be looking to focus him all the time. If you're in a dual lane and there's a Pocket and another enemy, and you're, for example, playing Grey Talon, you should be using all of your spirit nukes on Pocket. 7's kit during the laning stage consists mostly of shoving the wave into you. He's got his Power Surge, as well as his Lightning Ball, which are both abilities that can push the wave very fast. His stun can also be quite scary, because if you get stunned by him, usually you will die if you're out in the open. However, there's a significant delay before his stun, meaning you usually have time to escape. One thing I would say about 7 is his biggest weakness is if he gets caught out of position, then he will die fairly easily. He has no escape. He has little survivability at first. Do keep in mind that 7 has 8% base bullet resist, making him more resistant to bullet spam. Against 7 in lane, I don't think there are any specific items that you should be buying, but you should mostly be making sure that your wave isn't getting pushed in too hard. So try to keep the wave even. If he's able to push your wave in all the time, then it's going to be hard to deal with him because he'll just harass you under tower. Shiv is a very strong laner, and how you play against him depends mostly on his playstyle. Right now, there's 2 main Shiv builds, either gun or knife build. The people going knife build are going to be maxing the knife first. If you see that he's maxing the knife, you can actually check their skill points where they are being spent. If you press tab, you open up their little profile and then you hover over them. If you see he's building knife, then generally you're going to want to build some sort of health regen because you're going to get harassed a lot. So I would recommend buying extra regen if you see he's focusing on his knives. If you see he's not focusing on his knives and he's going the max slice and dice route, either way, early on, he's going to be doing a lot of spirit damage. Shiv is very reliant on being able to burst you down and on regenerating health through bloodletting. 2 counters to those things: against bloodletting, buying decay is very good. Against surviving his burst, having something like extra health or even barriers that make you harder to burst down are also very good. I would say that if the Shiv is not a very good player, it can be fairly easy to deal with him in lane, but if they're very good, you'll feel very pressured, and you'll need to buy these items. Also keep in mind that Shiv is a very strong shotgun character, which means that he can get a lot of denies on you. So make sure you don't make it too easy for him to get denies. Vindicta's abilities in the laning stage all offer different threats. Stake makes you vulnerable to ganks or potentially other abilities, as well as being tethered for 2 seconds. Flight gives her a lot of damage early, and Crow is decent damage over time, as well as percent health damage, which makes it particularly effective against tanks. The one thing you want to be careful about Vindicta is when she has flight, most characters in the game cannot really trade with her in lane at the moment. However, her flight is a 40-second cooldown. This means that if you're able to avoid fighting with her during the duration of her flight, you'll be able to be aggressive for about 32 seconds at the beginning of the game. Stake on its own is not that scary, but it can be very scary in duo lanes. In the laning stage, there's not a lot that you can do against this ability. Crow Familiar, there's not much to itemize against it. Just be aware of it. It is fairly hard to hit as it is a projectile that doesn't move insanely quickly. Therefore, if your movement is good and unpredictable, you should be dodging it most of the time. Viscous is a very strong laner at the moment. His punch does a lot of damage, and it's considered a melee attack, and his nuke is also a ton of damage. Not only that, but he has a cube, which allows him to save himself or an ally for 4 seconds, as well as dispel them. Against Viscous, most of the time, you're going to want to be focused on dodging the punches. They have a sound cue when they happen, and they are dodgeable, however, they are very hard. I would focus on making my movement as unpredictable as possible. On top of that, make sure not to stack on top of creeps, because if he's hitting you and the creeps with punch, he's going to push the wave, get the last hits, and get damage on you. So make sure that you're not on top of the creeps if he's using his punch on you all the time. Other than that, be aware that generally speaking, when you're against Viscous, you're not in a kill lane. So you don't want to itemize to necessarily kill Viscous unless you're doing very well in the lane. Keep that in mind and focus on farming. Warden's biggest threat during the laning stage is Binding Word as well as his grenade. I see a lot of newer players struggle against Binding Word, which is the cage. Against the cage, all you need to get out of the cage early is 2 stamina. If he has Mystic Reach, 2 stamina is still fine. All you need to do is perform a dash jump. If you don't know how to do that, you dash and then you jump at a specific time. You can practice it in the hero sandbox. Therefore, against Warden, I would highly recommend getting extra stamina early, because having 1 extra stamina makes it much easier to always have 2 stamina at the ready to deal with his cage. The other scary part is Alchemical Flask, because he's going to be spamming it, it slows you, and it reduces your weapon damage. If you get hit by Flask, you pretty much cannot trade with Warden. Just keep this in mind. Do your best to dodge the Flask. If you get hit by it, try not to go too aggressive. If he misses his Flask, that's usually when you can be aggressive. Warden is very slow and has a fairly large hitbox early on. I would use this to your advantage and try to be aggressive, especially if you're playing a hero like Infernus or like Vindicta that can do a lot of damage with your weapon. Wraith has 2 scary tools in lane, her cards and her full auto. Right now, most players are putting 2 points in card early. What this means is that the card is a 150 damage nuke without any items, and you get 2 charges. On top of that, they're usually building extra charge and other items to amp this up. Full auto is mostly a way to build up the cards faster and get a little bit of extra damage. If they use full auto, try not to show so that they can't build the cards off of you. You can also see how many cards Wraith has on top of her hat. It shows if she has 1 card, 2 cards, or 3 cards charged up. A lot of Wraith players' game plan is to keep as many cards as they need to burst you down from nearly 100 to 0. So a lot of the time, they'll build up 2 to 3 cards and then use all of them on you at once. Just keep in mind that if you're trying to engage on Wraith, if she has 2 to 3 cards, the chances that you actually win that fight are very small. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, her teleport is not really particularly scary in lane, but it does allow her to escape some situations. It has a 45-second cooldown, so you can definitely take advantage of it when it's on cooldown. Also, when she has no cards, she's a very weak hero. Her gun doesn't do that much damage, so you can be aggressive on her. Yamato's main tool in lane is Power Slash. It does a ton of damage and has a ridiculously large hitbox. I always feel like I've dodged it, and yet I still get hit by it. It's easy for me to say, but focus on dodging the power slashes. A lot of Yamatos make it extremely obvious when they're going for power slashes. Hide around a corner, hide behind geometry. Do not get hit by this. If the Yamato cannot hit power slashes on you, it will be very hard for her to win the lane. She has the lowest base health in the game with a 500, which means that she's extremely vulnerable to getting gone on early, especially before she has any points in power slash, because she doesn't even get any bullet resist while channeling it by default. This means if you're in a duo lane, focusing her early can often result on kills on her because she's very vulnerable. You also need to watch out for her right click, which is her explosive shot. I'm not sure what it's actually called, but it does do a lot of damage, particularly if the Yamato is good at hitting it. Unfortunately, there's not a ton you can do about that, other than knowing you're going to take a lot of harass in the lane, so items like Healing Right, Restorative Shot, or Extra Regen are all good options. That's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and if you want more content like this, please subscribe and leave a like. Have a good day.